A biker walked into a small-town diner, slapped an 81-year-old veteran, and thought he'd get away with it. 22 minutes later, the sound of diesel engines outside told him his day was about to change forever. You could have heard a pin drop. One moment, Earl Jennings was sipping his coffee and chatting with the waitress about the weather. The next, the sharp crack of a biker's hand hitting his cheek cut through the diner like a gunshot. Conversations froze mid-sentence, forks stopped halfway to mouths, and every eye in Mel's Country Diner turned toward booth number 4 near the window. Earl didn't move at first. The sting spread across his face, but he kept still, his hand resting calmly on the table. At 81, he'd survived worse, far worse. But this wasn't just a slap. It was disrespect, plain and deliberate. Travis Murdoch stood over him, shifting his weight so his leather jacket creaked. A jagged patch on his sleeve read Iron Jackals MC, a biker club locals knew to avoid. He wasn't a stranger. Henderson, Tennessee was too small for strangers, but trouble followed him everywhere. "What's the matter, old man?" Murdoch sneered, eyeing the Vietnam service medals on Earl's cap. "Think that makes you special? Nobody cares." Earl's voice stayed steady. "You've said enough. Move along." But Murdoch didn't. He leaned close, letting Earl smell the stale beer on his breath. Then the slap came without warning, loud, hard, public. Carla, the petite waitress in her 30s, stepped forward, but froze when one of Murdoch's tattooed friends shot her a cold warning look. "You're crossing the line, Travis," someone at the counter said quietly. Murdoch ignored him. Earl didn't lift his voice or push back. He simply reached into the pocket of his faded army green jacket, pulled out his phone, and typed one short message. "Come now." He placed the phone beside his plate, picked up his coffee, and took another sip. His hand didn't tremble. Murdoch laughed, glancing around like he expected applause. No one joined him. Everyone just watched in tense silence. "You think calling someone's gonna save you?" he taunted. "No one's walking in here to tell me what to do." Earl stayed silent. He'd learned long ago that silence could be its own weapon. Across the diner, a teenager whispered, "Isn't he the guy from the Veterans Hall?" His mother shushed him, already pulling out her phone. Seconds dragged. Murdoch took a seat at a nearby table with his friends, acting like nothing had happened. Carla poured their coffee without meeting his eyes. Earl kept watching the window. Main Street was quiet. A passing truck, a barking dog. Nothing unusual yet. The man at the counter leaned toward Earl. "You sure you don't want me to call Sheriff Beckett?" Earl shook his head. "No need. Someone's coming." The man wanted to argue, but something in Earl's steady expression stopped him. At the back of the diner, Murdoch started telling a loud story about a bar fight in Memphis. His friends laughed too loudly, too fast. Even they sensed the tension. Earl's phone buzzed once. He checked the screen briefly, slipped it back into his pocket, and stayed still. No change in expression, just a slight tightening around the eyes. Outside, a diesel engine rumbled faintly. No one mentioned it, but everyone heard it. Inside Mel's Country Diner, the slap was long past, but the weight of it hung heavy. People whispered quietly, unsure whether Earl was simply waiting or planning. Earl remained upright, shoulders squared, calm as stone. That unshakable calm kept the whole diner on edge. Murdoch leaned back with his boots up, smirking at Earl whenever he could. His tattooed buddy stared down anyone who dared look too long. Carla wiped clean tables that didn't need wiping. Passing Earl's booth, she whispered, "Do you want me to call someone?" "Already did," he replied. Phil McLean, a retired trucker at the counter, muttered, "If I were his age and someone smacked me like that." "You're not him," the man beside him cut in. "And you've never been to war." Minutes slid by slowly. A paper cup skidded down the street outside. Earl traced a finger along the edge of his plate, calm and controlled. He knew exactly how long it would take. The National Guard facility wasn't far, and when his son saw that message, he'd move fast. Murdoch waved for a refill. "You pour coffee like you're scared," he joked to Carla. She didn't answer. Phil finally spoke louder. "Travis, you've made your point. Leave him alone." "A point?" Murdoch grinned. "Oh, Phil, I'm just getting started." Earl set his coffee cup down. A single quiet click. Murdoch's smirk faltered. More minutes passed. People pretended to eat, but no one was really eating. Then, faint but growing, the low diesel rumble returned. Closer now. Unmistakable. Phil glanced toward the window. "You hear that?" he whispered. Earl didn't need to answer. Meanwhile, A few miles away at the National Guard training facility, the day was running smoothly. Sergeant Calvin Ricks, retired Army, 20 years, was halfway through a briefing with 7 of his old platoon brothers. They met twice a year to stay sharp and stay connected. His phone buzzed. He didn't think much of it until he saw the name. Dad. The message was only 2 words. Come now. Earl Jennings never wasted words. And he never asked for help unless things were serious. Calvin stood so fast his chair screeched across the concrete floor. I need a minute, he said, already heading toward the door. What's wrong? Asked Thomas Vega, a broad-shouldered man with a buzz cut and a steady voice. My father's in trouble, Calvin said, pushing outside. Where? Mel's Diner. That was enough. The men exchanged quick looks and immediately grabbed jackets and keys. They didn't ask for details. They didn't need to. By the time Calvin reached his pickup, Vega was already in the passenger seat. 2 more trucks started up behind them, engines humming low. As they pulled onto Main Street, Calvin tightened his grip on the steering wheel. It's Travis Murdoch, he muttered. It has to be. Dad wouldn't message me unless it was serious. And that guy's been trouble since the day he showed up. You want me to call Sheriff Beckett? Vega asked. No, not yet, Calvin replied. I'm not letting my dad sit there waiting for paperwork. We'll handle it first. The trucks rolled forward together, engines rumbling like a warning. Calvin's mind was already preparing for what he might find, and what he would do when he faced Travis Murdoch. Calvin was trying to keep things from boiling over, but still make it clear Earl wasn't a man to disrespect. In the truck behind them, Patrick Doolin rolled down his window and shouted over the engine noise. You think this is going to get physical? Calvin didn't answer right away. Depends on Murdoch, he finally said. But one way or another, he's learning something today. The convoy of 3 trucks wound through town, drawing curious looks from pedestrians. People in Henderson weren't used to seeing 8 men built like walls moving with such purpose. They made the last turn onto Main Street. Ahead, the neon sign of Mel's Country Diner flickered weakly. Through the window, Calvin spotted his father. Same booth, same posture, coffee cup in hand. A few tables over, Murdoch leaned back laughing at something his buddies said. Calvin parked with sharp precision, the tires kissing the curb. The other 2 trucks slid into place behind him. Doors opened almost together. Boots hit the pavement. Inside, heads began to turn. Carla's hand froze mid-pour. Phil muttered something under his breath. Calvin adjusted his cap and pushed the door open. The bell's jingle cut through the diner's muffled chatter. He stepped inside first, his platoon brothers fanning out behind him. Not into a threatening circle, just enough to make their presence impossible to ignore. Morning, Dad, Calvin said evenly. Earl looked up and gave a single nod. Cal. Murdoch's eyes flicked between them, his smirk dimming just a bit. Vega stopped at the counter, resting one arm on it. The others spread out around the room. Nothing aggressive, but nothing casual either. Calvin walked toward Earl's booth, slow and steady. He didn't look at Murdoch until he reached the table. You all right? I'm fine, Earl replied. But this man here doesn't understand respect. Calvin finally faced Murdoch. That right? Murdoch leaned back, forcing a laugh. This your boy? Thought he'd be bigger. His friends chuckled nervously. Calvin didn't blink. I'm big enough. The way he said it tightened the whole diner. Even Murdoch's friends felt the shift. He didn't take his eyes off Murdoch, but he was aware of everything. Vega's scanning the room like a battlefield, Doolin and Carter settling into a booth at an angle, the others posting up against walls. Their bodies were calm, but their presence was a message. Murdoch glanced around, sizing them up. He knew soldiers when he saw them. These men weren't weekend tough guys. They were forged somewhere he'd never been. Looks like you brought an audience, Murdoch said louder. Calvin sat across from his father, movements controlled. No, I brought witnesses. A ripple went through the room. Carla set the coffee pot down. Phil straightened on his stool. Travis, Phil said, maybe it's time you left. Murdoch glared. I'll leave when I'm ready. You're ready now, Calvin replied. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. People leaned in without meaning to. Murdoch scoffed. Your old man's got a smart mouth. Guess it runs in the family. My father's earned the right to say whatever he wants, Calvin said. You? Not so much. The tension ticked up. Vega shifted, drawing Murdoch's eyes. Earl set his cup down. Travis, Earl said, voice steady and edged with memory. You know what it's like to hold a dying man's hand and promise him you'll make it home? I do. More than once. I came back to live in peace. Not get slapped by someone trying to feel bigger than he is. Murdoch opened his mouth, but Calvin cut him off. You slapped an 81-year-old veteran in front of a room full of people. And you're sitting here like that's something to brag about. That's not how this ends. Outside, sunlight glinted off chrome bumpers. A small crowd gathered, peering in the windows. Murdoch shifted, the cracks showing. What? You gonna throw me out? We don't need to, Calvin said. You're going to walk out on your own. And before you do, you're going to apologize to my father. Not a chance. Vega spoke quietly. Then you're about to make this a whole lot harder on yourself. Murdoch's friends exchanged uneasy looks. One shifted like he was reconsidering his life decisions. Carla stepped in softly. Travis, just apologize and go. No one wants this to get worse. His jaw worked. Pride swelled. I'm not apologizing for anything. Then be ready for trouble you can't swagger out of, Calvin said. The bell rang as a local walked in, took one look, and quietly sat near the door to watch. Murdoch's fingers tapped anxiously. He wasn't laughing now. Calvin let the silence stretch. Sometimes a pause hit harder than a fist. You've got two choices, Calvin said. Stand up, apologize, walk out with a little pride. Or pretend you're the toughest man in the room and go down as the guy who slapped a veteran and ran. Murdoch tried to smirk, but his shoulders sagged. You think you scare me? No, Calvin said calmly. I think you know exactly who we are. That's why you can't stop talking. A couple quiet chuckles came from the soldiers. Earl leaned forward. Travis, I don't need your fear. I need your respect. And if you can't give it, you're about to learn why you should have. Respect's earned, Murdoch shot back. Then you just proved you've never had any, Earl replied. His friends weren't laughing now. The tattooed one muttered. Maybe we should just go. Calvin stood, slow and deliberate. Here's the truth. You leave without apologizing, and everyone here remembers you as the guy who hit a veteran and ran. You apologize. You walk out a man who made a bad call and owned it. Murdoch looked around. These men hadn't touched him, but their stillness was a wall. You brought an army, he muttered. No, Calvin said. These men were already with me. That's the difference. When one of ours calls, we come. Phil added from the counter. If you're smart, you'll take the easy way out. Otherwise, you'll be a local legend, and not in a way you'll like. Murdoch's hand twitched near his cup. For a second, it looked like he might explode, but he didn't. He leaned back, arms crossed. Maybe I don't care what people say. You will, Calvin murmured. The whole room felt it. And if I don't? Murdoch asked. Vega answered. Then you'll find out what it feels like to be the smallest man in the room, without anyone touching you. That hit him deeper than any threat. His friends looked away. The tattooed one whispered something that made Murdoch's jaw clench. Earl leaned in again. I've faced men overseas who thought they could take whatever they wanted because they held a weapon. You don't have one, Travis. All you have is your mouth, and it's writing checks you can't cash. Murdoch froze. No comeback. No laugh. Outside, someone from the crowd tapped lightly on the window. Curious about the standoff, a few heads turned toward the sound, but Calvin's eyes stayed locked on Murdoch. Last time I'm saying it, Calvin said. Stand up, look him in the eye, say you're sorry, and then leave. But the longer Murdoch stayed seated, the clearer it became that he was running out of ground. Even he could feel the walls closing in. He shifted again, leaning back as though trying to reclaim space that wasn't his anymore. His leather jacket creaked as he crossed his arms, eyes narrowing at Calvin. So that's it. You walk in here with your little military parade and tell me how it's going to go. Calvin didn't raise his voice. No, I'm not telling you how it's going to go. I'm telling you how it will go. That subtle difference hit harder than any shout. The diner seemed to tilt toward their conversation. Even the hum of the fridge and the clink of silverware faded beneath the weight of the moment. Murdoch's lip curled into a half smile. You know, I've had people try to intimidate me before. Never worked. Earl spoke before Calvin did, his tone low and steady. That's because they were trying. He's not. The truth in Earl's voice made Murdoch flick him a look of irritation, but it was the calm in Calvin's eyes that made him shift again. Still sitting with Carter, Patrick Doolin finally added, You ever been in a room where you're the only one who doesn't understand the rules? That's where you're sitting now, Murdoch. Murdoch didn't answer. His jaw tensed. His gaze drifted from face to face, somewhere between hunting for an ally and searching for an escape. Calvin stepped a bit closer. I'll give you a chance, he said. Stand up, say you're sorry, and walk away. No one follows you. No one touches you. You get to pretend this never happened. And if I don't? Murdoch asked, trying to sound casual, but there was a sharpness in his voice. Calvin didn't blink. Then you stay seated while everyone here, and probably half the county by tonight, remembers you as the man who slapped an 81-year-old veteran and had to be babysat out of a diner. A couple low chuckles rippled through nearby booths. Murdoch's cheeks warmed with color. You think that matters to me? It will, Vegas said from the counter. Because when you walk into the hardware store, or the gas station, or that bar you like on 5th Street, every eye will be on you. And you'll know exactly why. Earl leaned back, letting Calvin lead, but he kept Murdoch steady in his sights. You're young enough to make different choices, Travis, he said. But pride's a heavy thing to carry when you've already lost. The tattooed friend finally spoke, voice low. Travis, maybe just do it. This isn't worth it. Shut up, Murdoch snapped, but the crack in his armor widened. His friend leaned back, done defending him. The young couple in the corner exchanged a whispered comment. The woman didn't take her eyes off the scene. Even the clatter of a fork hitting a plate in the kitchen felt loud in the stillness. Calvin stepped right up to Murdoch's table, not crowding, just close enough that Murdoch had to look up at him. You had your fun, Calvin said. Now you're going to make it right. Murdoch looked away again, eyes drifting toward the exit. But with Calvin between him and the door, and 3 truckloads of trained soldiers posted around the diner, running no longer looked like a real option. From behind the counter, Carla spoke gently but firmly. Travis, enough. Just do the right thing. You've been coming here for years. Don't be remembered like this. Her voice softened the tension, but didn't lighten the pressure in the room. Murdoch tapped his fingers against the table, once, twice. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, letting out a slow breath. And what if I say no? He asked. Calvin didn't change tone. Then for the next 20 minutes, I'll tell you exactly what my father did for this country, and exactly what I did. And you'll sit there and you'll listen, because we'll make sure you do. Everyone here will hear it too. And they'll remember you stayed in your seat because you didn't have the courage to stand. He didn't shout, but the words landed harder than any threat. Murdoch's gaze darted to Earl, still calm, still watching him like he already knew how this ended. Before Murdoch could respond, Calvin's voice shifted, lighter, softer, but somehow more dangerous. You think this is about you and me? It's not. This is about what my father represents. You slapped him, Travis, but it wasn't just him. You slapped every man and woman who ever put on a uniform and did their job without asking for applause. Earl didn't move, but the weight of his silence said everything. Murdoch wasn't facing a frail old man. He was facing what that old man had lived through. Calvin stepped back half a pace, giving Murdoch space. A silent offer. Murdoch didn't move. Vega rested a hand on the back of a nearby chair. You're acting like you've got nothing to lose. Truth is, you've got more than you realize. Reputation's currency in a small town. Burn through it, and you won't have enough left to buy your way out of a paper bag. Patrick Doolin leaned forward. Right now, folks think you're just acting tough. If you don't fix this, they'll know you're weak. And that sticks. Murdoch's eyes moved between all of them, his smirk long gone, bravado thinning. His friends refused to meet his gaze. The tattooed one stared into his coffee like it might save him. Earl finally spoke again, voice steady. When I was your age, I thought I had something to prove too. But the men worth following never had to say they were in charge. People knew it by how they treated others. You don't understand that yet. Maybe you will someday. Murdoch let out a shaky exhale. His shoulders sagged. Just slightly, but enough. So what, he muttered. You want me to stand up in front of everyone and act like I'm sorry? Calvin's eyes narrowed. Acting is what you've been doing since you walked in. I'm telling you to mean it. The line hit hard. Murdoch's jaw tightened. Words didn't come. From the counter, Phil McLean added, there's 2 kinds of men in this world. The kind that can admit they're wrong, and the kind that dies inside pretending they're always right. You're choosing which one you're gonna be. Carla folded her arms. We've all had bad days, Travis. This doesn't have to be the worst one of your life, unless you make it that way. At last, Murdoch looked at Earl, not Calvin, not the soldiers. Just Earl. The old man sat steady, no gloating in his expression, just clarity. You ever think maybe people don't respect you? Murdoch asked, though the bite was gone. Earl didn't hesitate. Respect isn't free. You earn it day after day, but you can lose it in a single moment. The line hung heavy. Outside, more people had gathered. Phones were aimed at the window. Whatever Murdoch did next would live far beyond this diner. Vega's voice cut through softly. Moments like this don't disappear. You'll remember it. Everyone will. The question is whether you'll remember doing the right thing or failing to. Murdoch leaned back. Pride was still there, but chipped down by certainty on all sides. Earl added, "This isn't about making you small. It's about giving you a better way to walk out that door than the one you're heading toward." That struck deeper than anything else. Murdoch exhaled long and slow, eyes dropping for the first time. Then he placed his hand on the edge of the table, and for a moment, no one knew whether he was about to stand in surrender or double down. He didn't move. The room was so still that even the ceiling fan seemed louder, ticking seconds away. Calvin held his ground, gaze locked on Murdoch, giving him space for the choice. "You've got one clean exit," Calvin said quietly. "Don't waste it." Murdoch looked at Earl again. The old man's calm was unshakable, worse than any threat, because it said, "You can't rattle me." Outside, phones were still recording. The tattooed friend leaned in. "Travis, enough, man. This ain't worth it. Just do it." The other biker remained silent, but his expression said the same. Finally, Murdoch shoved his chair back. The scrape of metal on tile cut through the room. He stood slowly, like the weight of the moment added years to his frame. He didn't look at Calvin, didn't look at the soldiers. He looked straight at Earl. "I was out of line," he said, voice rough but steady enough for everyone to hear. "Shouldn't have put my hands on you." Earl didn't move for a moment, then gave one small nod. "Respect starts there." Murdoch swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." The words were stiff, forced through pride, but they were real. Behind the counter, Carla exhaled. Phil gave a small approving nod. The young couple looked at each other like they'd just witnessed a movie scene play out in real life. Calvin kept his eyes on Murdoch. Murdoch hesitated, then added, "I didn't mean to disrespect your service. I just wasn't thinking." Earl's voice stayed steady. "Thinking or not, you fix things by owning them. And you just did." For a moment, the two men just looked at each other. No handshake, no grand gesture. Just a quiet acknowledgement that something in the room had shifted. Murdoch turned toward the door, but Calvin's voice stopped him. "Travis." The biker froze. "You're going to remember this," Calvin said, not as a threat, but as a certainty. "Next time you feel like proving yourself, ask if you're proving strength or trying to hide weakness." Murdoch didn't answer. He just walked out, his friends trailing behind him. The bell over the door jingled as they stepped into daylight. Outside, the gathered crowd parted to let them through. Some people filmed their exit, others simply watched in silence. The rumble of motorcycle engines broke the tension as the bikers mounted up and rode off down Main Street. Inside, it was as if the diner finally exhaled. Conversation started again, soft at first, then louder. Carla lifted the coffee pot and resumed her rounds, pouring for customers eager to return to normal. Earl reached for his cup, took a sip, and set it down. "Well," he said quietly, "that's over." Calvin slid back into the booth across from him. "Not just yet. Word's going to spread before your coffee cools." Vega leaned against the counter, studying Earl. "You handled that better than most would've." Earl shrugged lightly. "Didn't need to raise my voice. He just needed to see there was no winning the direction he was headed." Phil chuckled. "Guess he figured that out." Earl glanced toward the window, where the crowd outside was thinning. "Clear enough for today. We'll see about tomorrow." Calvin followed his gaze, then looked back at his father. "You ready to finish breakfast?" Earl smiled faintly. "Always." But outside, a few people still lingered, not out of curiosity anymore, but because they knew they'd witnessed something they'd be talking about for years. Once the bikers were gone and the sound of their engines faded down Main Street, the diner settled, though not into its old rhythm. Something quieter, heavier, more aware now lived in the room. Carla topped off Earl's coffee again, this time with a steady hand. "On the house," she said. Earl nodded. "Appreciate it." At the counter, Phil turned on his stool to face Calvin. "You handled that clean." Didn't lay a hand on the man, but still walked him right out the door. Calvin shrugged. Wasn't about throwing punches. He needed to see what happens when you mess with the wrong man. And sometimes the wrong man isn't the one standing in front of you. It's the people standing behind him. Vega smirked. You could tell he was looking for a way out. Halfway through, his pride just kept holding him back. That's usually how it works, Earl said, taking another bite of his now cold breakfast, as if the whole confrontation had been nothing more than a pause in his meal. A young couple from the corner finally stood to leave. On their way out, the man stopped by Earl's booth. "Sir, my grandfather served in Vietnam. I just want to say I'm sorry you went through all that. And thank you for your service." Earl met his eyes. "Your grandfather's welcome. And so are you." After they left, Calvin leaned in, elbows on the table. "You know word's going to get around fast. Henderson's small. Half that crowd probably already posted it online." Earl didn't seem bothered. "Let it. Maybe it'll make the next guy think twice." Carla returned to wipe the table the bikers had left behind. "Not sure I've ever seen Travis Murdoch walk out without a smart comment. You pulled something off today." Calvin shook his head. "Dad pulled it off. I just showed up." Patrick Doolin and Carter walked over. "We're heading back to base," Doolin said. "But next time you text us, maybe give a heads up if we're walking into a standoff in the middle of breakfast." Calvin laughed. "I'll keep that in mind." The soldiers filed out one by one, offering nods to Earl before stepping into the sunlight. Outside, the crowd had mostly dispersed, though a few locals still lingered in small groups, retelling the moment. Phil shook his head. "Gonna be hard for Travis to show his face at the VFW after this." Earl sipped his coffee. "If he does, maybe he'll keep his hands to himself." Vega paused at the door, glancing back at Earl. "You know, not every father has a son who'd drop everything and bring back up." Earl's expression softened just slightly. "Not every father's as lucky as I am." Calvin smiled at that, but didn't say anything. Outside, the sun was high now, shining off the trucks parked at the curb. People passing by slowed to glance inside, imagining what they'd missed. Carla set the check on the table. Earl pushed it back. "Put it on my tab. And add the coffee for these guys too." She looked at Calvin. "You sticking around?" "Just long enough to make sure he finishes breakfast," Calvin said. Earl gave him a look. "You know I can take care of myself." "I know," Calvin replied. "But sometimes it's not about whether you can. It's about making sure people know you're not alone." They ate in a comfortable quiet, the kind that comes after a storm. Customers drifted back into their meals, though every so often someone glanced at Earl to confirm he was really as calm as he appeared. By the time they stood to leave, the diner felt different. Not safer. Henderson had always been safe. Just more aware. A reminder had been planted about what respect looked like when it was defended the right way. Earl knew moments like this didn't just fade. They traveled. They changed people. Outside, the last of the crowd was gone. Only a few footprints remained on the sidewalk. Calvin walked a few steps ahead, scanning the street out of habit. Earl followed at his steady pace, adjusting the bill of his cap. "You know this'll be all over the internet by tonight," Calvin said. Earl shrugged. "Then maybe someone out there gets the message without having to live it first." They reached the trucks, but didn't climb in right away. "You could have called the sheriff," Calvin said. "Could have had Murdoch hauled out and charged." "Why call me?" Earl met his eyes. "Because I didn't need an arrest. I needed a lesson. One he'd remember. And I knew you'd bring the kind of men who teach lessons without throwing fists." Calvin thought about it. "You think it'll stick?" Earl nodded. "It'll stick. Maybe not enough to change him entirely, but enough to make him think twice. And sometimes that's all you can do. Make a man think twice." A breeze drifted down Main Street, carrying the smell of fresh bread from the bakery. The town's quiet had returned, but it wasn't the same quiet. Across the street, Phil stepped out of the hardware store and waved. "You two take care. And Earl, breakfast is on me next time." "We'll see about that," Earl called back. Calvin's platoon brothers were already gone, but the solidarity they'd brought into the diner still lingered, in the way people nodded at Earl, in the small gestures of respect as they passed. Calvin looked over at his father as they climbed into the truck. "You've always stayed calm in the middle of things. Don't think I've ever seen you lose your temper." Earl chuckled. "Oh, I've lost it plenty. Just never when it would have made me lose more than I gained." They drove out of town, passing familiar storefronts. After a moment, Calvin said, "People don't realize how much strength it takes to stay seated and not swing." Earl kept his eyes forward. "That's because most think strength is about hitting harder. Truth is, real strength is knowing when not to." The words settled between them. Back at Earl's house, he stepped out and paused at the porch steps. "You coming in?" he asked. Calvin shook his head. "I've got to get back to base. I'll check in later." Earl nodded firmly. Good. And Calvin, I'm proud of you. Calvin smiled, a real one, before driving off. Inside, Earl set his cap on the table and poured himself another coffee. Alone now, he took a long breath, not of relief, but of satisfaction. The kind you feel when you didn't just win an argument, you reinforced a principle. Because the real victory wasn't in making Murdoch apologize. It was in showing everyone in that diner, and maybe even strangers online, that respect is worth standing up for. And you don't need to throw a single punch to defend it. Moments like that ripple outward. Someone in the diner might treat the next person a little better. Someone watching a video might think twice before letting pride take over. Even Murdoch, whether he admits it or not, will carry this morning with him. Respect is earned. Respect is defended. And when you defend it the right way, you set an example others can follow. If you've ever stood up for someone who couldn't, or wouldn't, defend themselves, you know exactly what that feels like. And if you haven't yet, one day you might. So remember this. When the moment comes, be the one who steps forward, not the one who looks away. And if you want more stories that show what real strength looks like, the quiet kind, the kind that matters, make sure you subscribe. Because the next story just might change the way you see strength.